group. Then Hellenic is also a direct descendant of Proto-Indo-European. It developed into Classical Greek, and then over the last couple of thousand years, Classical Greek has developed into Modern Greek. So there's a lot of difference between Classical Greek and Modern Greek, but actually it's the same language just as it has developed over time. Then if you look next on the chart, you'll see Albanian and then Anatolian and Armenian. Albanian and Armenian are minor language groups that have developed directly from Proto-Indo-European. Albania is the little country that is directly across from east of the boot in Italy, and then Armenia is in what is now modern-day Turkey and in Georgia, which is just north of Turkey. Anatolian is modern-day Turkey. There were three languages that were considered to be in the Anatolian language group: Lycian, Hittite, and Lydian. You probably haven't heard of all three of these. Are dead now. Lycian and Lydian you may never have heard of. They were spoken in what is now modern-day Turkey. Hittite, if you know anything about the Old Testament, you would probably have heard of the Hittites. They wrote in cuneiform, and we have lots of the Hittite language, so there's been a lot of language study of Hittite, which is part of this Anatolian language group. Then moving to the right, or to the east if you will, we have the IndoEuropean language group, and there are probably as many or more speakers in this language group than any of the others. As you can see, Indo-Iranian split at an early time into two major groups: the Iranian group, which is centered in Old Persia or modern Iran, and then the Indic group, which is centered in modern-day India. Looking at the Iranian broke into two different groups: Persian, which is the major language spoken in Iran today. Sometimes you'll hear it called Farsi. And Pahlavi, which was an older form of Persian, had its own writing system, and so on. Next to them are Pashto, Baluchi, and Kurdish. And these are Iranian languages which are spoken in different parts. Kurdish, of course, is the language of the Kurds, and it's spoken over in the western part of Iran. Pashto is the language of the Pashtun people who live mainly in Afghanistan and western Pakistan. The Indic language group all goes back to Sanskrit. Sanskrit is the oldest Indo-European language that we have written down. We have some Sanskrit records dating back to 1500 BC. Over the centuries, Sanskrit has developed into several of the languages that are spoken in modern-day India. The first two there are the most populous, I guess: Hindi and Urdu. Actually, Hindi and Urdu are the same language, but they have different writing systems. Hindi uses a writing system based on the old Sanskrit, and Urdu uses the Arabic writing system. The reason they're considered different languages is political more than linguistic, because people who believe in the Hindu religion refer to themselves as speaking Hindi, and people who believe in the Muslim religion, as you have in Pakistan, call the same language Urdu. So it has different writing systems, but basically it's the same language. Then you've got other Indian languages spoken here: Bengali, which is spoken in the eastern part of India; Punjabi, which is spoken in the western part; Gujarati, Assamese. But the last one listed here is Romani. Romani is the language of the Gypsies, and a lot of people would be surprised to learn that it's listed over here in the Indic language group, but that's what it is. I once knew a Danish guy who lived with the Gypsies in Yugoslavia, and he told me that he went overland with the Gypsies all the way to India, and he said that when he got to India, that when they spoke to Hindi language speakers, he could actually understand what they were saying, and he could make himself understood speaking Romani. So there really is a relationship to the language the Gypsies speak and the language spoken by the Indians in India. And then finally we have the Tocharian language group. This is also a dead language. We only know about it from some manuscripts that were found in Buddhist monasteries over in China. Once these things were deciphered, they figured out that this was actually an Indo-European language, and this has been known for about a century. But it was not known who spoke it or where they came from or anything about these people. It was just that they had these manuscripts. Then in the 70s and 80s, over in China, in the desert, in the very far western part of China, where it borders on Russia on one side and India on the other, Chinese anthropologists over a 10 or 12 year period found out in the desert, in the sand, several well-preserved mummies. And the fascinating thing about these mummies that they found was that they were not Chinese, and there was nothing in the histories that suggested that Caucasian people had ever lived in this part of the world. And certainly it wasn't part of Chinese history, because the official line there was that the European peoples were foreign devils, late arrivals, and had nothing to do with the history of China. As a result, these mummies were not ever advertised, and nobody knew about them for years. And it just happened by chance that there was a Western anthropologist at a museum in Western China, and one of the people in the museum showed him some of these mummies. And now today we know about these mummies, and the general consensus is these peoples, who obviously lived in this part of the world for centuries, are most likely the Tocharians. Clearly their features are European features, and the clothing that they wear is very similar to Celtic clothing. The mummies were so well preserved because they were buried in the dry sand during the winter time, and apparently their bodies mummified before they ever had a chance to rot. If you look at this one called Churchin Man here, he lived about 3,500 years ago, in other words about 1500 BC, which is roughly the same time of the Trojan War. He was about 6 feet tall and had reddish-brown hair. The woman you see in the top left here is known as the Beauty of Lulan. She lived about 2000 BC, in other words about 500 years or so before Churchin Man, or that's the reading they get on the radiocarbon dating. She was also about 40 years old when she died, and if you look at the bottom left, you can see that an artist has reconstructed her face. To her right, another mummy, a man of about 40 with reddish blonde hair, who was also found in the desert grave in western China. Here's some more of the well-preserved mummies that clearly show European features. The one on the left had reddish blonde hair. The woman on top right probably was a sacrificial victim because she had her eyes gouged out and she was partially dismembered. But she had long blonde hair, and buried with her was a baby who was found in the same grave. Interestingly, the Tocharian language had a lot more in common with Celtic and Germanic, that is to say, the Western Indo-European languages, than it did with the Indo-European language groups of the East, like the Indo-Iranian. So nobody knows why these people were living in the desert in western China, although it is along the Silk Road, which was the ancient path of commerce that existed between China and the West. But other than these mummies and the manuscripts that are found in the monasteries, we know